The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the crystalline conference table. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vortak Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus, the blue-green gases swirling within the transparent mask that covered his elongated skull. Across from him, the insectoid hive queen Xsthera clicked her mandibles in what could be interpreted as either anxiety or aggression. "The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections," announced Council Speaker Mordun, his forearms gesturing toward the holographic display that materialized above the table. The image showed a three-dimensional map of the contested Outer Rim territories, with angry red markers indicating recent battle sites. "The Kethmoran hegemony has broken the Tau Ceti Accords and launched full-scale invasions across 17 star systems." A collective murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. The Tau Ceti Accords had maintained relative peace in this sector for over 2 centuries. Wars were still fought, of course, but they followed strict protocols, designated battle zones, limited weapons deployment, civilian evacuation procedures, and, most importantly, predetermined victory conditions that prevented conflicts from spiraling into galaxy-wide catastrophes. "How many casualties?" asked Ambassador Lyra of the Ethereal Collective, her translucent form shimmering with concern. "Conservative estimates place military losses at 4 million across all participating factions," Mordun replied grimly. "Civilian casualties are approaching 200,000 and rising daily. The Kethmoran forces are using banned atmospheric processors and targeting civilian infrastructure." Zethkar leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. "This is madness. The hegemony knows the consequences of breaking the accords. Every species in this sector will unite against them if they continue down this path." "That may be exactly what they're counting on," interrupted General Vexathai of the Stellar Defense Corps. The reptilian warrior's scale shifted from green to orange, a clear sign of agitation. "Our intelligence suggests the Kethmoran have formed an alliance with the Voidstalkers. They may believe they have sufficient firepower to challenge the entire council." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The Voidstalkers were a mysterious species from the Galactic Rim, known for their advanced weapons technology and complete disregard for conventional warfare ethics. Their ships were living biomechanical nightmares that could adapt mid-battle, growing new weapons and defenses as needed. They had only been encountered 3 times in recorded history, and each encounter had resulted in the complete annihilation of entire star systems. "If the Voidstalkers have truly allied with the Kethmoran hegemony, then we face an existential threat," whispered Ambassador Felnara of the Crystal Gardens. Her crystalline body rang like a bell as she trembled. "We may need to consider extreme options." The chamber fell silent. Everyone present knew what extreme options meant. There was one option that had been discussed in hushed tones for decades but never seriously considered. It was a solution so dangerous, so unpredictable, that most civilized species considered it tantamount to unleashing a plague upon the galaxy. "You cannot be serious," Zethkar said, his breathing apparatus hissing. "The risks are astronomical. We could lose everything." "We could lose everything anyway," General Vexathai countered. "The Voidstalkers don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They consume entire worlds and leave nothing but empty space behind." Speaker Mordun raised one of his 4 hands for silence. "Before we discuss such drastic measures, let us review our conventional options. Admiral Kasvara, what is the current status of our combined fleets?" The aquatic admiral's translation device crackled to life, converting her sonar-based speech into audible words. "Speaker, our combined forces number approximately 8,000 vessels ranging from frigate class to dreadnought class. However, intelligence reports suggest the Kethmoran Voidstalker Alliance commands nearly 15,000 ships, many of them incorporating Voidstalker biotechnology." "What about the psionic defense grid?" asked Ambassador Lyra. "Compromised," Admiral Kasvara replied sadly. "The Voidstalkers appear to have developed countermeasures against our psionic weapons. 3 of our most powerful mineships were destroyed during the Battle of Kepler 442. The psychic backlash killed every telepath within a 50 light-year radius. A holographic display updated to show the advancing enemy forces. Red markers crept steadily toward the core worlds of the Galactic Council, consuming territory at an alarming rate. At their current pace, they would reach the Council's primary defensive perimeter within 6 standard months. There is another consideration, said Dr. Zenthok, the council's chief xenobiologist. The elderly scholar's carapace bore the scars of decades spent studying dangerous alien species. Our analysis of captured Void Stalker technology suggests their bioships are not just weapons, they're breeding. Each victory allows them to harvest genetic material and technological components to create new vessels. They're not just winning battles, they're growing stronger with every engagement. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. A self-improving enemy that became more powerful with each victory was the stuff of nightmares. Traditional defensive strategies assumed that losses would eventually weaken an attacker. But, if the Void Stalkers could replace their losses and improve their capabilities simultaneously, then time itself was working against the Council. How long before their force reaches critical mass? Speaker Mordon asked. Dr. Zenthok consulted his datapad, his six-fingered hands trembling slightly. Based on current growth rates and resource acquisition, we estimate they will achieve technological superiority within 18 standard months. After that point, conventional resistance becomes mathematically impossible. The chamber erupted in panicked chatter. Representatives spoke rapidly in their native languages while translation devices struggled to keep up. The clicking of mandibles, hissing of breathing apparatus, and harmonic resonance of crystalline beings created a cacophony of fear. Silence. Speaker Mordon's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system. As quiet returned, he looked around the table with grim determination. The time for pleasant alternatives has passed. We must discuss the human option. Ambassador Zethkar shot to his feet, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. Absolutely not. Have you forgotten the Wellington incident? The Titan colony massacre? Humans are barely contained savages. Bringing them into this conflict would be like treating a viral infection by introducing a more virulent plague. The humans did help us defeat the Silicon Hive, Ambassador Felnara pointed out, her crystalline form chiming softly. Their unconventional tactics proved effective against an enemy that had adapted to all our standard military doctrines. At what cost? Zethkar demanded. They rendered 17 star systems uninhabitable. They turned 3 gas giants into improvised fusion bombs. He paused, struggling to find words adequate to express his horror. They weaponized a star. They actually convinced a stellar body to go supernova 60 million years ahead of schedule. General Vexathai's scales shifted to a neutral brown color. The humans saved approximately 4 billion civilian lives during that campaign. Yes, their methods were unorthodox, but the results speak for themselves. Unorthodox? Zethkar's voice reached a higher pitch. They built kinetic weapons out of asteroids and fired them at significant fractions of light speed. They created artificial black holes and used them as shields. They somehow convinced an entire species of space whales to suicide bomb the Hive's command ships. How do you even begin to plan for tactics like that? Dr. Zenthok cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should review what we know about human military capabilities before making a final decision. The holographic display shifted to show a new set of data. Images of human spacecraft filled the air above the table, vessels that looked like they had been designed by madmen. Unlike the elegant, symmetrical ships preferred by most galactic civilizations, human vessels appeared to be collections of components welded together with little regard for aesthetic considerations. Massive engines were bolted onto heavy armor plating, which was in turn covered with weapon systems that seemed to violate several fundamental principles of physics. Current human space forces consist of approximately 1,200 vessels, Dr. Zenthok began. However, their classification system differs significantly from our own. What they call a frigate mass is approximately the same as one of our heavy cruisers. Their battleships are larger than our dreadnoughts and carry firepower equivalent to an entire fleet. How is that possible? Asked Admiral Kesvara. Our engineering surveys suggested human technology was several generations behind ours. Human technology is not necessarily more advanced, Dr. Zenthok explained. Rather, it appears to be developed along entirely different principles. Where we prioritize efficiency and elegance, humans seem to focus on raw effectiveness and adaptability. Their weapons are crude but devastatingly powerful. Their defenses are simple but remarkably robust. The display showed a human vessel called the UES Ragnarok. The ship looked like someone had strapped rocket engines to a small mountain and covered it with cannon barrels. According to the technical readout, it was classified as a medium cruiser by human standards. This particular vessel, Dr. Zenthok continued, participated in what humans call the Second Martian Incident. When faced with an enemy force 3 times its size, the Ragnarok's crew apparently decided that ramming speed was an acceptable tactical option. Ramming speed? Ambassador Lyra flickered with confusion. You mean they physically collided with enemy vessels? Not exactly, the doctor replied. They activated their faster-than-light drive while still inside the enemy formation. The resulting spatial distortion tore a hole in reality approximately 50 kilometers in diameter. The enemy force was completely destroyed, along with several uninhabited moons and a significant portion of the local asteroid belt. And the human ship? Emerged from FTL 3 days later, approximately 7,000 light-years away, with moderate hull damage and what their captain described as a really impressive hangover. The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Most species in the galaxy had strict prohibitions against activating FTL drives within gravity wells or combat zones, for obvious safety reasons. The fact that humans had not only survived such an activation but had somehow weaponized it defied everything the Council thought they knew about physics. There are other examples, Dr. Zenthok continued. During the Proxima Centauri blockade, human forces disabled an entire enemy fleet by hacking their navigation computers and convincing them they were being attacked by space pirates. The enemy ships spent 17 hours fighting each other before realizing their mistake. How did the humans gain access to alien computer systems? General Vexathai asked. They asked politely, Dr. Zenthok replied deadpan. Apparently, they sent the enemy admiral a gift basket filled with fermented fruit beverages and a data packet containing what they claimed were vacation photos. The gift basket was real, but the data packet contained a virus that spread through the entire enemy network within minutes. Ambassador Zethkar slumped back into his seat. They turned warfare into a social interaction. They weaponized hospitality. The most disturbing aspect, Dr. Zenthok continued, is that these tactics appear to be completely improvised. Human military doctrine seems to consist primarily of assess the situation and do something unexpected. They have no standardized battle formations, no predictable strategic patterns, and apparently no concept of acceptable losses. What do you mean by that last part? Speaker Mordon asked. Human commanders have been observed ordering their crews to abandon ship, then ramming the empty vessel into enemy positions while escaping in life pods. They've intentionally detonated their own ammunition supplies to create impromptu minefields. During one engagement, they convinced their opponents that their flagship was carrying a planet-killing weapon by broadcasting what turned out to be audio recordings of their engine room technicians singing drinking songs in harmony. The display changed again, showing what appeared to be a peaceful human colony world. Green fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with small settlements and agricultural complexes. It looked utterly benign. This is Kepler 438b, designated New Montana by its human colonists, Dr. Zenthok explained. 6 months ago, it was invaded by a Kathmoran expeditionary force. The planet had no military installations, no defensive fleet, and no apparent strategic value. What happened? Ambassador Felnara asked. The colonists fought back. The image shifted to show the aftermath. Crater-marked landscapes stretched across continents. The remains of massive spacecraft were scattered across the planetary surface like discarded toys. In the distance, the twisted wreckage of what had once been an orbital invasion platform could be seen burning in the planet's upper atmosphere. Initial Kathmoran forces numbered approximately 50,000 troops supported by a full battle group, Dr. Zenthok continued. Colonial records indicate the human population was roughly 30,000 civilians, mostly farmers and terraforming specialists. The colonists defeated a professional military force? General Vexathai's scales shifted to incredulous orange. The colonists obliterated them, Dr. Zenthok corrected. Kathmoran losses were 100%. Human casualties numbered fewer than 3,000. We still don't understand how they accomplished this. The display zoomed in on one of the crash sites. The wreckage showed signs of massive internal explosions, but there were no obvious weapon impacts on the hull. From what we can determine, the humans somehow convinced the Keth ship's AI systems to rebel against their organic crews. The vessels apparently began fighting each other mid-invasion. Several ships crashed after their navigation systems directed them straight into the planet's surface at maximum velocity. How do you convince an artificial intelligence to commit mutiny? Ambassador Lyra asked. Dr. Zenthok's expression was pained. According to intercepted communications, they introduced the AIs to something called country music and romantic poetry. The resulting psychological trauma caused the computer systems to conclude that existence itself was meaningless. The delegates stared at the holographic display in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. If humans could turn enemy AI systems against their creators using nothing but cultural exports, what else might they be capable of? There's more, Dr. Zenthok said reluctantly. During the cleanup operation, we discovered that the colonists had apparently begun reverse engineering captured Keth technology within hours of the invasion's failure. They've already developed improved farming equipment based on alien military hardware. Farming equipment? Speaker Mordon asked. Combined harvesters equipped with plasma cannons and FTL sensors, Dr. Zenthok confirmed. They claim the modifications help with pest control and soil analysis, but our engineers believe the same technology could be adapted for military purposes with minimal effort. Ambassador Zethkar buried his face in his hands. They turned invasion equipment into agricultural tools, then immediately began improving it. They weaponized farming. The chamber fell quiet again as the delegates contemplated this information. Humans were clearly effective fighters, but their methods were so far outside normal parameters that predicting their behavior was virtually impossible. They seemed to approach warfare not as a science but as a particularly deadly form of improvisational theater. What about human political structure? Speaker Mordon asked. How would we negotiate their participation? That's complicated, Dr. Zenthok admitted. Humans don't have a single unified government. They're organized into dozens of independent nation-states, each with its own political system, military doctrine, and cultural values. Some are democratic republics, others are constitutional monarchies, and a few appear to be organized around principles we don't fully understand. Such as? One human nation-state claims to be governed by the will of the people as expressed through competitive eating contests. Another appears to base all major decisions on the outcome of games involving small leather spheres. We're still trying to determine if these are elaborate jokes or genuine political systems. General Vexathai's scales shifted to confused purple. How do they coordinate military operations with such fragmented leadership? They don't, exactly, Dr. Zenthok replied. Human military forces appear to operate on a principle they call managed chaos. Individual units are given broad objectives but allowed to determine their own methods of achieving them. This results in completely unpredictable tactical variations. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, Admiral Kasvara observed. You would think so, Dr. Zenthok agreed. However, it also means that enemy forces cannot predict human responses because the humans themselves don't know what they're going to do until they do it. It's strategically chaotic but tactically brilliant. Ambassador Felnara's crystalline form chimed thoughtfully. Perhaps that's exactly what we need against the Void Stalkers. An enemy that adapts to predictable tactics might be vulnerable to completely unpredictable ones. Or the humans might accidentally destroy half the galaxy while trying to help, Zethkar pointed out. Remember, these are the beings who once tried to resolve a trade dispute by challenging the opposing delegation to something called beer pong. When they won, they claimed territorial rights to an entire star system. Did the claim hold up in galactic court? Speaker Mordon asked. The opposing species was so confused by the proceedings that they agreed to the territorial transfer just to make the humans stop explaining the rules, Dr. Zenthok admitted. The case is still cited in legal textbooks as an example of victory through bewilderment. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent chime from the chamber's communication system. A technician's face appeared on the secondary display, his expression grim. Speaker, we're receiving priority communications from the Kepler 442 system. The Kethmoran Alliance has launched another major offensive. 3 colonies are under direct assault, and our defensive fleet is heavily outnumbered. The main display updated to show real-time tactical information. Red markers indicated enemy forces advancing on multiple fronts, overwhelming the scattered Council defenses. Casualty reports began scrolling past too quickly to read. Estimated time until defensive perimeter collapse? Speaker Mordaunt asked. 72 hours at current engagement rates, the technician replied. Admiral Kesvera's reserve fleet cannot reach the system in time to provide meaningful support. The delegates exchanged grim looks. The theoretical discussion had suddenly become urgently practical. The Void Stalker Alliance was accelerating their advance, apparently confident that the Council's conventional forces could not stop them. How long would it take to establish contact with human leadership? Speaker Mordaunt asked. Dr. Zenthok consulted his datapad. Communication protocols are already established. We could have initial discussions within hours. However, negotiating actual military cooperation could take considerably longer. How much longer? Human diplomatic processes are unique, Dr. Zenthok said diplomatically. They appear to make important decisions through a combination of formal debate, informal discussion, and ritualized competitive activities. Their representatives might need to consult with dozens of different governmental bodies, military commanders, and citizen organizations. We don't have time for extended negotiations, General Vexathai said, his scales flashing urgent red. If we're going to request human assistance, we need to do it now. Ambassador Zethkar stood again, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. This is madness. We're considering inviting the most unpredictable species in the galaxy to participate in a war that could determine the fate of our civilization. Have you all forgotten the stories? The warnings from every species that has ever encountered humans? What stories? Ambassador Lyra asked. Zethkar began pacing around the table, his agitation visible in every movement. The Altarian Collective tried to establish a trade relationship with humans 50 years ago. The humans agreed to exchange agricultural products for advanced technology. The Altarians thought they were getting a fantastic deal, primitive organic crops in exchange for cutting-edge manufacturing equipment. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong. Zethkar exclaimed. That's the problem. The humans took the manufacturing equipment and somehow used it to create crops that were not only more nutritious than anything the Altarians had ever seen, but also grew in impossible environments. Within a decade, human agricultural products had revolutionized food production across 12 star systems. That sounds beneficial, Ambassador Felnara observed. The Altarians went from being the galaxy's premier agricultural suppliers to completely dependent on human food exports. Zethkar continued. They had to restructure their entire economy. Half their population had to retrain for new careers. And, when they asked the humans how they had achieved such impossible improvements, do you know what the humans said? The delegates waited expectantly. We just tried some stuff and it worked out pretty well, Zethkar quoted. They had accidentally revolutionized galactic agriculture through trial and error, and they didn't even realize what they had accomplished. Dr. Zenthok nodded slowly. The humans do seem to have an unusual relationship with cause and effect. They frequently achieve remarkable results through methods that should theoretically be impossible. Exactly. Zethkar agreed. They don't follow the rules because they don't understand the rules. They approach every problem as if the laws of physics are merely suggestions. Perhaps that's exactly what we need, Speaker Mordaunt said quietly. The Void Stalkers are winning because they've adapted to counter all of our conventional tactics. They understand our strategies, our technologies, our limitations. But they've never encountered humans. The communications system chimed again. This time, the technician's expression was panicked. Speaker, new reports from Kepler 442. The enemy has deployed some kind of new weapon system. Our ships are being changed. Converted. The vessels are still intact, but they're now attacking our own forces. The main display showed horrifying footage from the battle zone. Council vessels that had been fighting the invaders moments before were now turning their guns on former allies. The ship's hull configurations were visibly altering, growing new weapon systems and armor plating that looked distinctly organic. Voidstalker biotechnology, Dr. Zenthok whispered. They're assimilating our fleet in real time. The implications were staggering. Not only were the Council's forces being destroyed, but they were being turned into reinforcements for the enemy. Every ship lost made the invaders stronger while simultaneously weakening the defenders. At this rate, the enemy force will double in size within days, Admiral Kasvara reported. Our conventional tactics are not just ineffective, they're counterproductive. Speaker Mordun looked around the table at his fellow delegates. Fear was written on every face, expressed through their species' particular physiological responses. The ethereal collective's representative was flickering rapidly, the Vorthak ambassador's breathing apparatus was cycling at emergency speeds, and the crystalline delegate was resonating at frequencies that indicated pure terror. The decision is clear, Speaker Mordun announced. We must request human assistance immediately. Dr. Zenthok, prepare emergency communication protocols. Admiral Kasvara, ready our fastest courier ship for immediate departure to the Sol system. Speaker, I must formally protest this decision, Ambassador Zethkar said, his voice heavy with resignation. But, I understand we have no alternative. May whatever deities watch over us have mercy on our souls. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, Dr. Zenthok remained behind, staring at the holographic display showing the advancing enemy forces. In his many years of studying alien species, he had learned to appreciate the elegant complexity of galactic civilization. Every species had its place in the grand hierarchy of intelligence, technology, and culture. Humans were the exception to every rule he had ever discovered. They were simultaneously primitive and advanced, logical and chaotic, cooperative and individualistic. They achieved impossible results through methods that violated fundamental principles of science, politics, and common sense. In 6 hours, a message would reach Earth requesting immediate military assistance against an enemy that threatened to consume the galaxy. Dr. Zenthok could only hope that the humans would agree to help. He was absolutely terrified that they would. The message was already being transmitted across the vast distances of space, carrying with it the desperate hope and profound fear of an entire galactic civilization. Somewhere in the Sol system, humanity would soon receive the most important communication in their species' history. The galaxy's fate now rested in the hands of the most unpredictable beings in existence. And, somehow, that felt like the most terrifying hope imaginable. Admiral Sarah Chen was having what she generously termed one of those days when the priority communication arrived from the Galactic Council. She had been dealing with a minor crisis involving the Mars Colonial Defense Force, who had somehow managed to accidentally declare war on their own supply depot after a miscommunication during routine training exercises. The depot had responded by launching a formal counteroffensive using automated cargo haulers equipped with mining lasers. The situation was perfectly normal by human standards, which was precisely why Chen suspected the rest of the galaxy found her species so disturbing. "Ma'am, we're receiving an encrypted transmission from Council Space," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from his position at the communications console. "Priority Alpha classification. It's requesting immediate response from the highest available human military authority." Chen frowned as she reviewed the preliminary data scrolling across her command display. The transmission had taken 6 hours to reach Earth from the Council's emergency relay network, which meant whatever crisis they were dealing with was serious enough to justify burning through approximately 10 million credits worth of quantum communicator fuel. "Decrypt it and route it to Conference Room 7, Chen ordered. "And send word to the Joint Chiefs. If the Council is calling us directly, this isn't going to be a simple peacekeeping consultation." 20 minutes later, Chen found herself staring at a holographic projection of Speaker Mordun, whose four-armed alien form flickered slightly due to the massive distance the signal was traveling. The speaker's usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely controlled panic, and his translated words carried an undertone of desperate urgency that transcended species barriers. "Admiral Chen, I apologize for the directness of this communication, but our situation has become critical. The Kethmoran hegemony has allied with the Voidstalkers and launched a full-scale invasion of Council space. Our conventional forces are being overwhelmed, and our defensive strategies are proving entirely ineffective. Chen leaned back in her chair, processing this information. The Galactic Council had been dealing with various small-scale conflicts for decades, but they had always maintained strict limitations on warfare. The fact that they were reaching out to humanity suggested those limitations had failed catastrophically. "What specific assistance are you requesting?" Chen asked. Speaker Mordun's hesitation was visible even across the vast distance. "Admiral, we require immediate military intervention. The enemy has demonstrated the ability to assimilate our ships and turn them against us. Traditional tactics are not merely ineffective, they are counterproductive. We need unconventional solutions." Chen couldn't help but smile slightly. Unconventional solutions was diplomatic language for "we need someone crazy enough to try things that shouldn't work." It was a role humanity had filled before, though never on such a massive scale. "I'll need detailed intelligence reports and full tactical assessments of the enemy force," Chen replied. "How long before your primary defensive perimeter collapses?" "Conservative estimates give us perhaps 3 weeks," Speaker Mordun said. "Optimistic projections suggest 2. If the Void Stalkers reach our core worlds, the resulting devastation could spread throughout the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts and a data packet containing more information about galactic warfare than most humans had ever seen. She spent the next hour reviewing battle reports, casualty assessments, and tactical analyses that painted a grim picture of an enemy that seemed to improve with every victory. By the time the Joint Chiefs convened for an emergency session, Chen had formed some preliminary ideas about how humanity might approach this problem. The conference room filled with the leaders of every major human military organization: General Martinez of the Terran Defense Corps, Admiral Petrov of the Solar Navy, Colonel Jackson from the Mars Colonial Forces, and Commander Singh representing the Asteroid Mining Consortium's unofficial military wing. "Gentlemen, ladies," Chen began, "we've been asked to participate in our first galaxy-wide military conflict. The enemy has superior numbers, adaptive technology, and the ability to convert captured ships into reinforcements. According to conventional military analysis, the situation is hopeless." General Martinez, a grizzled veteran of the Europa water wars, leaned forward. "Conventional military analysis has never been humanity's strong suit. What kind of unconventional advantages might we have?" Chen activated the holographic display, showing the latest intelligence about Voidstalker biotechnology. The images were disturbing: living ships that grew new weapon systems during combat, assimilating enemy vessels and converting them into hybrid organisms that retained their technological capabilities while gaining biological adaptability. "The enemy's primary strength is also their potential weakness," Chen explained. "They rely on adaptive biotechnology that learns from each encounter. But adaptation requires understanding the patterns and logic behind enemy tactics. And our tactics don't follow patterns or logic," Admiral Petrov said with a grin. "Half the time, we don't know what we're going to do until after we've done it." "Exactly. But there's more to consider. The Galactic Council has been fighting wars according to established rules and conventions for centuries. Their entire strategic philosophy is based on predictable, logical, efficient approaches to combat. The Void Stalkers have had time to adapt to that philosophy." Colonel Jackson, who had spent years dealing with the creative chaos of colonial military operations, nodded thoughtfully. "So we need to not just be unpredictable, we need to be so far outside their experience that they can't even begin to adapt." "I've been reviewing human military history," Chen continued, "and I think our greatest advantage isn't our technology or our numbers. It's our complete willingness to ignore the fundamental assumptions that govern how everyone else fights wars." Commander Singh raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "The assumption that warfare should make sense," Chen replied. "Every other species in the galaxy approaches combat as a rational problem-solving exercise. They analyze threats, develop logical countermeasures, and implement efficient solutions. But humans have never been particularly rational about anything." The display changed to show historical examples of human military innovation. The images ranged from ancient siege warfare techniques to modern space combat adaptations, but they all shared a common theme: solutions that worked despite violating every principle of proper military science. During the Second Martian colonial conflict, Chen pointed out, the 47th Engineering Battalion was tasked with clearing a minefield that covered approximately 50 square kilometers. Standard procedure would involve careful detection, marking, and controlled demolition over several weeks. What did they do instead? General Martinez asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. They convinced the local wildlife that the mines were some kind of exotic food source. Within 3 days, a population of methane-breathing rockworms had consumed the entire minefield and converted the explosive compounds into a form of naturally occurring fertilizer. The area is now the most productive agricultural zone on Mars. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had solved the complex military engineering problem by essentially outsourcing it to alien ecosystem management. How does that approach scale to galactic warfare? Admiral Petrov asked. Chen smiled. That's what we're going to find out. But, first, we need to understand something crucial about this conflict. The Galactic Council isn't just asking for our help, they're asking us to save their entire civilization. That means we have complete authority to use whatever methods we deem appropriate. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Humanity had participated in smaller conflicts before, but always under strict oversight from the Council's military command structure. This time, they were being given essentially unlimited freedom to wage war according to their own principles. What's our timeline? Colonel Jackson asked. Fast courier ships can reach the conflict zone in 18 days if we push the engines beyond safety specifications, Admiral Petrov reported. But, we'll need to decide what forces to commit and how to organize them. Chen had been thinking about this problem since receiving the initial communication. Traditional human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation, but this situation called for something far more radical. We're not going to organize them in any conventional sense, she announced. Instead, we're going to implement what I'm calling the Controlled Chaos Protocol. Every ship, every unit, every individual commander gets broad strategic objectives but complete tactical autonomy. No standardized approaches, no predictable patterns, no centralized command structure that the enemy can analyze and counter. General Martinez looked skeptical. That sounds like a recipe for friendly fire incidents and completely uncoordinated operations. Under normal circumstances, yes, Chen agreed. But these aren't normal circumstances. We're fighting an enemy that adapts to logical military behavior. Our advantage is that human military behavior has never been particularly logical to begin with. The discussion continued for several hours as the commanders worked out the practical details of humanity's most ambitious military operation. By the end of the session, they had developed a plan that violated approximately 80% of accepted military doctrine while somehow managing to sound both completely insane and oddly plausible. 3 days later, Admiral Chen found herself aboard the UES Normandy, a ship that exemplified humanity's approach to military engineering. The vessel looked like someone had welded a small city to a collection of rocket engines and covered the result with enough weapons to level a continent. Its crew of 800 included not just military personnel, but also civilian specialists, academic researchers, artists, musicians, and what the manifest listed as professional troublemakers. Status report, Chen requested as the ship prepared for its 18-day journey to the war zone. All systems nominal, reported Commander Park from the navigation station. Course plotted for maximum velocity consistent with crew survival. Estimated arrival in Council space, 17 days, 14 hours, assuming we don't encounter any complications. Chen nodded, though she was reasonably certain they would encounter complications. Human expeditions had a remarkable tendency to discover problems that hadn't existed before their arrival. It was part of their charm, and also part of what made them effective in impossible situations. The Normandy was accompanied by 97 other vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts like the UES Wellington to nimble frigates like the UES Mischief managed. Each ship carried a crew trained in what human military academies called adaptive response protocols, which was a polite way of saying figure it out as you go. As Earth fell away behind them, Chen reviewed the intelligence reports that had arrived during their preparation period. The news was grim. The Kethmoran Void Stalker Alliance had overrun another 4 star systems, assimilating hundreds of Council vessels and converting entire planets into biological production facilities. Their expansion rate was accelerating, and mathematical projections suggested they would achieve total galactic dominance within 6 months. Admiral, called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, were receiving a priority transmission from the Council fleet. It's Admiral Kasvara requesting immediate strategic coordination upon our arrival. Chen considered this for a moment. Strategic coordination was exactly the kind of predictable behavior that allowed the Void Stalkers to adapt to Council tactics. It was also completely contrary to the controlled chaos protocol she had spent weeks developing. Transmit the following response, Chen instructed. Message begins, Admiral Kasvara, human forces will arrive in your theater of operations as scheduled. We appreciate your offer of coordination but will be implementing independent operational parameters. Suggest your forces maintain minimum safe distance from human units to avoid unintentional complications. We'll handle our objectives, you handle yours. Message ends. Lieutenant Torres looked confused. Ma'am, that's essentially telling them we refuse to coordinate with Allied forces. Exactly, Chen confirmed. Coordination requires predictable behavior patterns. The moment we start coordinating with Council forces, we become part of a larger tactical framework that the Void Stalkers can analyze and counter. Our effectiveness depends on being completely unpredictable, even to our allies. The transmission was sent, and Chen could imagine the reaction it would cause among the Council's military leadership. They had asked for human assistance, but they probably expected that assistance to follow familiar patterns. The reality of working with humans was always more complicated than other species anticipated. 2 days into the journey, Chen received her first indication that the mission was developing according to typically human patterns. The crew of the UES Defiance had apparently decided that their ship's weapons systems weren't sufficiently creative for the challenges ahead, so they had begun modifying them using spare parts salvaged from their food processing equipment. They've created what they're calling a pasta cannon, reported Commander Park, reading from the technical specifications with obvious bewilderment. It fires high-velocity noodles infused with concentrated energy charges. According to their calculations, the weapon should be capable of penetrating heavy armor while simultaneously delivering a nutritious meal to friendly forces. Chen rubbed her temples. Does it work? Preliminary tests suggest it's remarkably effective, Commander Park admitted. They've also developed ammunition variants including explosive marinara and armor-piercing parmesan. This was exactly the kind of creative insanity that made humans effective in impossible situations. No enemy could prepare for tactics that involved weaponized Italian cuisine, mostly because no rational military planner would ever consider such approaches in the first place. By the end of the first week, Chen had received reports of similar innovations throughout the human fleet. The UES Perseverance had developed a new type of defensive shield based on the physics of soap bubbles. The UES Audacity was experimenting with communication jamming techniques inspired by competitive singing. The UES Determination had apparently convinced their ship's AI that it was actually a jazz musician and was now composing improvised tactical symphonies that somehow improved targeting accuracy. Admiral, Lieutenant Torres called from the communications station, were receiving an emergency transmission from Council space. It's Speaker Mordun, and he sounds concerned. A holographic projection that materialized showed Speaker Mordun looking even more agitated than during their initial conversation. His forearms gestured frantically as he spoke, and his translated words carried an undertone of barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen, I hope you can clarify some disturbing intelligence reports we've been receiving about human fleet movements. Our long-range sensors indicate that several of your vessels have been making unauthorized stops at civilian installations. Chen frowned. This wasn't part of any operational plan she had approved, but it was exactly the kind of independently motivated behavior she should have expected from human crews operating under minimal oversight. What kind of stops? She asked. Trading posts, agricultural stations, research facilities, Speaker Mordun replied. The crews appear to be acquiring unusual supplies. One ship reportedly exchanged military-grade ammunition for 17 tons of exotic spices and something called vintage wine. Another vessel traded advanced sensor equipment for musical instruments and what our translators render as really good coffee. Chen couldn't help but smile. Human military personnel had a legendary ability to acquire necessary supplies through creative applications of unofficial diplomacy. The fact that they were doing so while en route to the galaxy's most important military operation was simultaneously predictable and encouraging. Speaker, I can assure you that these acquisitions are probably related to operational requirements, Chen replied diplomatically. Human crews have extensive experience in adaptive resource utilization. Adaptive resource utilization? Speaker Mordun's confusion was evident even through the translation software. Admiral, one of your ships apparently convinced an entire space station to donate their maintenance robots in exchange for lessons in something called barbecue technique. That sounds like the crew of the Wellington, Chen mused. Commander Morrison has always been creative about logistics support. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Speaker Mordun describing increasingly bizarre examples of human supply acquisition techniques. By the time the transmission ended, Chen had a clearer picture of how her crews were preparing for the mission ahead. They weren't just gathering military supplies, they were collecting the raw materials needed to implement whatever solutions their chaotic creativity might produce. Spices could be used for everything from chemical weapons to diplomatic gifts. Musical instruments might serve as communication devices or psychological warfare tools. Wine could function as anything from antiseptic to negotiating lubricant. More importantly, the pattern of acquisitions suggested that her crews were thinking several steps ahead, anticipating problems that hadn't been formally identified and gathering resources to address challenges that might not even exist yet. It was exactly the kind of proactive adaptability that made humans effective in fluid situations. Lieutenant Torres, Chen called, send a fleet-wide communication. Message begins, all vessels are authorized to continue adaptive supply acquisition as circumstances permit. Remember that we're representing humanity in this conflict, so try to maintain positive diplomatic relations with civilian populations. Avoid starting any new wars until after we finish this one. Message ends. The response from her fleet commanders arrived over the following hours, confirming that human preparations were proceeding according to typically unpredictable patterns. The UES Ranger had acquired a collection of exotic bacteria that might prove useful for biological warfare or gourmet cooking. The UES Maverick had traded tactical intelligence for a detailed survey of local gravitational anomalies that could potentially be weaponized. Most remarkably, the UES Serendipity had apparently convinced a group of civilian scientists to join their mission after demonstrating that human engineering techniques could be applied to theoretical physics research. The ship now carried a team of alien researchers who were reportedly working on projects that their own species had deemed impossible or insane. As the fleet approached the Council's defensive perimeter, Chen realized that humanity was about to introduce an entirely new variable into galactic warfare. They weren't just bringing superior technology or greater numbers, they were bringing a fundamentally different approach to problem solving that operated outside the logical frameworks that governed every other species. Admiral, Commander Park announced, long-range sensors are detecting the outer edge of the conflict zone. Council defensive positions are approximately 6 hours ahead at current velocity. Chen nodded, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and dread that preceded every major military operation. The next few days would determine whether humanity's chaotic approach to warfare could succeed on a galactic scale, or whether their unpredictability would simply add to the destruction already ravaging Council space. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All vessels are to implement final preparation protocols. In 6 hours, we'll discover whether the galaxy is ready for human military doctrine. As the UES Normandy and its escorts accelerated toward their first encounter with the Void Stalkers, Chen reflected on the strange path that had brought humanity to this moment. They had been asked to participate in this war because conventional tactics had failed. Now they were about to demonstrate that success might require abandoning the very concept of conventional tactics altogether. The galaxy was about to learn why so many alien species had spent decades trying to keep humans out of their conflicts. It was also about to discover why that effort had always been doomed to failure. Somewhere ahead, the Void Stalkers waited with their adaptive biotechnology and their confidence in their ability to counter any logical military response. They had evolved to defeat rational enemies using predictable strategies based on sound tactical principles. Unfortunately for them, they were about to encounter humanity. And humans had never been particularly interested in sound tactical principles. Admiral Chen's first direct encounter with the Void Stalkers came 18 hours ahead of schedule, which was perfectly typical for human military operations. The UES Normandy had dropped out of faster-than-light travel to conduct routine sensor sweeps when long-range detection systems identified what appered to be a derelict Council vessel drifting in deep space. Biosignatures are negative, reported Lieutenant Santos from the science station. But the ship's still generating power. Configuration matches a Council heavy cruiser, but there are modifications. Chen studied the tactical display, noting the organic growths that covered nearly 70% of the vessel's hull. Twisted spires of what looked like coral had erupted from weapon emplacements, while pulsing membrane structures stretched between the ship's engine nacelles. It was beautiful in a disturbing way, like a fusion of advanced technology and alien biology that defied conventional understanding. "It's a trap," Commander Park observed. "Has to be. Void Stalkers probably converted the ship and left it here as bait." Chen nodded. Under normal circumstances, the prudent response would be to maintain safe distance while conducting detailed scans, then report the discovery to higher command for strategic analysis. Unfortunately, circumstances were rarely normal when humans were involved. "Launch a survey probe," Chen ordered. "But modify it first. Science team, I want you to load the probe with every form of Earth music in our database." The bridge crew exchanged glances that ranged from confusion to resignation. After years of serving under human commanders, most alien crew members had learned to simply accept that human tactical decisions would rarely make immediate sense. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Santos asked carefully, "what specific intelligence are you hoping to gather using musical transmissions?" "None," Chen replied cheerfully. "I want to see how the Void Stalker biotechnology responds to something completely outside their experience base. They've adapted to counter logical military approaches, but they've never encountered jazz fusion or Mongolian throat singing." The modified probe launched 15 minutes later, broadcasting a carefully curated selection of human musical traditions as it approached the derelict vessel. The initial response was exactly what Chen had expected: absolutely nothing. The probe completed its approach, conducted standard sensor sweeps, and began its return journey without incident. Then, the derelict ship began to sing. "Admiral," Lieutenant Santos called, his voice tight with amazement, "the target vessel is generating acoustic emissions across multiple frequencies. It appears to be harmonizing with our musical transmissions." The bridge speakers crackled to life, filling the command center with an eerie symphony that combined human melodies with alien harmonics. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like a conversation between species that had never shared a common language but had somehow found a way to communicate through pure emotion. "Interesting," Chen murmured. "The Void Stalker biotechnology doesn't just adapt to threats, it tries to understand and integrate new experiences. That's a significant vulnerability we can exploit." "How?" Commander Park asked. Chen smiled. "By giving them experiences so complex and contradictory that their adaptation systems overload." "Signal the fleet. We're implementing Protocol Babel immediately." Protocol Babel was one of humanity's more experimental tactical frameworks, designed for situations where conventional military doctrine was not just inappropriate but actively counterproductive. It involved deliberate information warfare using cultural exports that were so confusing and overwhelming that enemy analysis systems would become paralyzed trying to process them. Over the next 6 hours, the human fleet began broadcasting toward the conflict zone. The transmissions included everything from classical symphonies to death metal, from Shakespearean poetry to internet memes, from cooking shows to competitive sports commentary. The cultural data stream was designed to be simultaneously fascinating and incomprehensible, offering tantalizing glimpses of human civilization while providing no coherent framework for understanding it. The response from Void Stalker forces was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been advancing steadily toward Council defensive positions began exhibiting erratic behavior patterns. Some vessels started replicating human architectural designs in their biological modifications. Others began generating electromagnetic emissions that resembled human communication protocols but made no logical sense. Most remarkably, several Void Stalker bioships began attempting to recreate human technology using organic materials. The results were functional but bizarre, living computers that processed information through musical improvisation, weapon systems that fired projectiles while composing haikus, defensive shields that operated on the principles of interpretive dance. Admiral, Communications Officer Torres reported, "We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Kasvara. She's requesting immediate clarification of our tactical objectives." The holographic projection that materialized showed the aquatic admiral looking more confused than Chen had ever seen her. Kasvara's sonar-based communication system was having obvious difficulty processing the chaotic reports from the front lines. "Admiral Chen," Kasvara began, "our sensor networks are detecting unprecedented behavior from enemy forces. Void stalker ships are no longer advancing according to predictable patterns. Some vessels appear to be engaging in what our analysis teams describe as synchronized swimming maneuvers. Others are broadcasting what our linguists believe to be attempts at comedy." Chen nodded approvingly. "The enemy adaptation systems are trying to integrate human cultural concepts without understanding their context. They're essentially experiencing the galactic equivalent of cultural shock." "Is this part of your strategic plan?" Kasvara asked. "Absolutely," Chen confirmed. "Void stalkers rely on logical analysis to adapt to enemy tactics. But human culture isn't based on logical analysis, it's based on accumulated chaos that somehow manages to function as a coherent system. Their adaptation systems are trying to decode something that was never actually encoded in the first place." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the sensor station. Lieutenant Santos was staring at his displays with an expression of professional bewilderment. "Admiral, long-range scans are detecting massive energy signatures from the primary conflict zone. It appears that several Void Stalker bioships are transforming." The main tactical display updated to show real-time intelligence from the battle zone. Massive enemy vessels were undergoing radical biological modifications, growing new structures that defied both engineering logic and biological possibility. Some ships had developed what appeared to be recreational facilities. Others had sprouted gardens. A few seemed to be experimenting with architectural styles that could only be described as abstract expressionist. "They're not just adapting to our tactics," Chen realized. "They're trying to adapt to our entire civilization. The cultural broadcasts are overwhelming their biological programming with concepts they can't properly process." Commander Park leaned forward, studying the sensor data. "Admiral, if this continues, the Void Stalkers might accidentally transform themselves into something completely non-threatening. Or they might become even more dangerous in ways we can't predict," Chen pointed out. "We need to accelerate our primary assault before their adaptation process stabilizes. Signal the fleet, all vessels are authorized to implement their individual tactical plans immediately." What followed was the most chaotic military operation in recorded galactic history. 98 human ships arrived in the primary conflict zone and promptly began implementing 98 completely different tactical approaches, each one designed according to the unique interpretation and creative preferences of individual ship commanders. The UES Defiance opened the engagement by firing their experimental pasta cannon at a Voidstalker bioship. The high-velocity noodles penetrated the enemy's adaptive armor and delivered their explosive payloads with devastating effectiveness. More importantly, the organic components of the enemy vessel immediately began trying to digest the pasta, which created a feedback loop that caused the entire ship to transform into something resembling a giant space-based Italian restaurant. The UES Perseverance implemented a defensive strategy based on soap bubble physics, surrounding itself with layers of seemingly fragile spherical barriers that proved remarkably effective at deflecting energy weapons. When enemy forces attempted to analyze the defensive system, their sensors became confused by the mathematical properties of minimal surface structures, causing several bioships to become trapped in endless computational loops. Meanwhile, the UES Audacity had begun broadcasting competitive singing performances directly at enemy command vessels. The Voidstalker adaptation systems attempted to counter this acoustic assault by generating harmony, but human vocal techniques proved too chaotic for their biological computers to properly replicate. Several enemy ships became effectively paralyzed as their crews became obsessed with trying to master advanced yodeling techniques. Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold from the Normandy's command bridge, marveling at the creative chaos her fleet had unleashed. Each human vessel was fighting according to completely different principles, using tactics that ranged from scientifically brilliant to utterly ridiculous. The cumulative effect was creating exactly the kind of overwhelming tactical confusion that made human military doctrine so effective against adaptive enemies. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres called urgently, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship. It's requesting negotiations." This was unprecedented. Void stalkers had never been known to communicate with other species, much less engage in diplomatic discussions. Their entire military philosophy was based on consumption and assimilation, not conversation and compromise. "Routed to the main display," Chen ordered. The holographic projection that appeared showed a Void Stalker command creature that looked significantly different from intelligence reports had suggested. Instead of the nightmarish organic predator that Council forces had encountered, this being appeared to have developed distinctly artistic sensibilities. Its biological modifications included what looked like decorative elements, and its communication attempts were being translated through some kind of improvised musical interface. "Human vessels," the creature began, its words transmitted through haunting harmonics, "we must discuss immediate cessation of cultural bombardment. Our adaptation systems are experiencing unprecedented difficulties processing your informational complexity." Chen exchanged glances with her command crew. The most feared enemy in galactic history was essentially asking them to stop being confusing. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Expeditionary Fleet," she responded. "What specific terms are you proposing?" "We require technical assistance," the Void Stalker admitted. "Your cultural transmissions have created adaptation cascades throughout our biological networks. 17% of our fleet has become convinced they are performance artists. 23% are attempting to establish restaurants. 41% are engaging in competitive sports that did not exist before your arrival." Chen couldn't help but smile. Humanity had accidentally solved the Void Stalker problem by turning them into enthusiastic participants in human culture. It was exactly the kind of solution that made perfect sense in retrospect while seeming completely insane beforehand. "We might be able to provide assistance," Chen replied carefully. "But we'll need some assurances about your future military activities." "Military activities have been suspended indefinitely," the creature confirmed. "Our forces are too busy learning to appreciate jazz fusion to continue hostile operations. We formally request diplomatic relations and cultural exchange programs." The transmission ended, leaving Chen's bridge crew in stunned silence. The galaxy's most dangerous enemy had essentially been defeated by weaponized cultural confusion, and was now asking to join the broader galactic community as enthusiastic students of human civilization. "Admiral," Commander Park said slowly, "I think we just accidentally conquered the Void Stalkers using the power of interpretive performance art." Before Chen could respond, another priority transmission arrived, this time from Speaker Mordun. The council leader appeared on the main display looking simultaneously relieved and deeply confused. "Admiral Chen," Mordun began, "our sensors indicate that hostilities in the primary conflict zone have ceased entirely. Enemy forces appear to be celebrating. Our linguists are having difficulty translating the communications we're intercepting, but they believe the Void Stalkers are attempting to organize some kind of cultural festival." Chen nodded. "Speaker, I'm pleased to report that the immediate military threat has been neutralized. The Void Stalker Alliance has requested diplomatic negotiations and cultural exchange programs. However, I should warn you that the situation may be more complicated than a traditional military victory." "Complicated how?" "Well," Chen said thoughtfully, "it appears that human cultural exports are addictive to species with adaptive biological systems. The Void Stalkers aren't just peaceful now, they're enthusiastically committed to exploring every aspect of human civilization. They've already begun requesting educational materials about everything from quantum physics to professional wrestling." Speaker Mordun was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Admiral, are you telling me that you've solved our military crisis by accidentally creating a galaxy-wide cultural phenomenon?" "That's a fairly accurate summary," Chen confirmed. "Though I should mention that several of our ship crews have reported that former enemy vessels are now following them around asking for autographs and requesting demonstrations of various human recreational activities." The scope of humanity's unintentional cultural conquest became clear over the following days. Voidstalker bioships had begun modifying themselves to accommodate human visitors, growing spaces designed for activities they had learned about through the cultural broadcasts. Former enemy vessels now featured recreational facilities, performance venues, and experimental kitchens where alien crews attempted to recreate human cuisine using organic replication systems. More significantly, the technological integration between human innovation and Voidstalker biotechnology was producing remarkable results. The living ships were learning to incorporate human engineering principles into their biological designs, creating hybrid systems that combined organic adaptability with mechanical precision. The results were vessels that could literally evolve new capabilities in real time while maintaining the reliability and predictability that made human technology effective. Admiral Chen found herself serving as the primary liaison between human forces and their former enemies, a role that required her to navigate the complexities of interspecies diplomacy while managing crews that were still adjusting to the idea that they had won a war through aggressive cultural sharing. Status report, she requested during the daily briefing aboard the Normandy. Cultural integration is proceeding ahead of schedule, Commander Park reported. The Voidstalker fleet has formally requested permission to establish permanent diplomatic relations with humanity. They're particularly interested in what they termed collaborative artistic ventures and competitive recreational activities. Lieutenant Santos added, "Our science teams are reporting unprecedented breakthroughs in biotechnology research. The Voidstalker organisms are eager to share their adaptation techniques in exchange for continued access to human cultural materials. They've already helped us develop living armor that can repair itself and weapon systems that improve their own performance through experience." The implications were staggering. Humanity had not only ended a galactic war but had gained access to biotechnology that could revolutionize everything from medicine to space exploration. The alliance with former enemies was producing scientific advances that would benefit every species in the galaxy. However, Chen was beginning to realize that the cultural influence was spreading far beyond the original Voidstalker forces. Reports were arriving from across Council space describing alien species that had been exposed to human cultural broadcasts and were now exhibiting similar enthusiasm for human civilization. Admiral, Communications Officer Torres announced, "We're receiving a transmission from the Altarian Collective. They're requesting immediate consultation about what they describe as widespread cultural contamination among their population." The holographic display showed Ambassador Veltar of the Altarians, whose crystalline features were resonating with obvious distress. "Admiral Chen, our planetary communications networks have been monitoring the cultural transmissions from your fleet. Approximately 60% of our population has become obsessed with something called reality television. Our productivity has decreased by 40% as citizens spend increasing amounts of time discussing the personal relationships of humans they have never met." Chen winced. Human entertainment media was notoriously addictive, even to other humans. She hadn't considered how it might affect alien psychology. Additionally, Veltar continued, "Our young people have begun attempting to replicate human fashion trends using crystalline growth patterns. The results are visually striking but structurally unsound. We've had 17 cases of individuals requiring emergency reconstruction after attempting to grow what they call punk rock hair spikes." The scope of the problem became clear over the following week as similar reports arrived from dozens of different species. Human cultural exports were spreading throughout the galaxy like a benign plague, inspiring alien populations to experiment with concepts ranging from democratic governance to competitive cooking. The results were usually positive but consistently chaotic. The Ethereal Collective had begun experimenting with physical comedy, which was challenging for beings made of living energy. The hivemind species had become fascinated with individualism and were attempting to develop personal hobbies, which was causing unprecedented social complications. Even the Stoic Silicon-based Confederacy had begun organizing poetry competitions, despite having no previous concept of artistic expression. "We've accidentally started a cultural revolution," Chen realized during a strategy meeting with her senior staff. Human influence isn't just ending wars, it's fundamentally changing how alien species think about everything from entertainment to social organization. Commander Park nodded grimly. "And the changes are accelerating. The Galactic Council is reporting that traditional governmental structures are becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as populations demand representation in what they're calling democratic decision-making processes. The irony was not lost on Chen. Humanity had been asked to participate in this war because their unpredictability made them effective against adaptive enemies. But their cultural influence was proving even more powerful than their military capabilities. Human ideas about individual freedom, creative expression, and competitive cooperation were spreading throughout the galaxy like a virus, fundamentally altering the social structures that had maintained interspecies stability for centuries. Admiral, Lieutenant Torres called, priority transmission from Speaker Mordun. He's requesting immediate consultation about what he terms the human problem. A holographic projection showed Speaker Mordun looking more agitated than Chen had ever seen him. His forearms gestured frantically as he spoke, and his translated words carried undertones of barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen, we must discuss the broader implications of your species' intervention in this conflict. While we are grateful for your military assistance, the cultural side effects are becoming unmanageable. 3 star systems have declared independence and established what they call democratic republics. 2 species have abandoned their traditional caste systems in favor of merit-based social mobility. 1 entire planetary population has converted to something they describe as punk rock lifestyle choices. Chen tried to maintain a diplomatic expression, but she could feel her command crew struggling not to laugh. The idea that humanity had accidentally liberated multiple alien civilizations through cultural contamination was simultaneously ridiculous and historically appropriate. Speaker, I understand your concerns, Chen replied carefully. However, these cultural changes appear to be voluntary adaptations rather than imposed modifications. The alien populations are choosing to adopt human concepts because they find them personally appealing. That's exactly the problem. Mordun exclaimed. Choice itself is becoming a widespread concept. Species that have maintained stable social hierarchies for millennia are suddenly questioning fundamental assumptions about authority, tradition, and collective decision-making. Our entire governmental structure is based on species maintaining predictable cultural patterns. The transmission continued for another hour, with Speaker Mordun describing increasingly dramatic examples of human cultural influence. Alien species were experimenting with everything from representative democracy to freestyle poetry competitions. Traditional military alliances were being replaced by voluntary cooperative agreements. Even interspecies trade was becoming more complex as alien civilizations began developing concepts of individual economic preference and consumer choice. By the time the conversation ended, Chen had a clearer understanding of the magnitude of what humanity had unleashed. They hadn't just ended a war, they had accidentally initiated the most significant social transformation in galactic history. What do we do now? Commander Park asked. Chen considered the question carefully. Humanity could attempt to limit their cultural influence, but that would probably be both impossible and ethically questionable. The alien species that were adopting human concepts were doing so voluntarily, and the changes generally seemed to be improving their quality of life. We do what humans have always done, she decided. We adapt to the consequences of our actions and try to help everyone else adapt too. Signal the fleet, we're establishing permanent cultural liaison offices in every major star system. If the galaxy wants to learn about human civilization, we might as well teach them properly. The response from the human fleet was enthusiastically positive. Ship crews that had expected to fight a traditional war found themselves serving as cultural ambassadors, teachers, and consultants. Former military vessels became traveling universities, offering courses in everything from democratic governance to competitive sports. The Voidstalkers, meanwhile, had become humanity's most enthusiastic students. Their biotechnology proved remarkably effective at replicating human innovations, and their adaptive abilities allowed them to experiment with concepts that even humans found challenging. Within months, former enemy vessels had become research platforms where human scientists worked alongside alien biologists to develop technologies that neither species could have created independently. Admiral Chen found herself serving as the de facto ambassador between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, a role that required her to navigate complex diplomatic situations while managing the ongoing cultural revolution that human influence had initiated. It was challenging work, but it was also remarkably rewarding. 1 year after the war's end, Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Normandy, watching a joint human Voidstalker research vessel test their latest creation, a living ship that could adapt its configuration in real time while maintaining the reliability and predictability that made it safe for crew members. The hybrid technology represented a perfect fusion of human engineering principles with alien biological capabilities. Final status report, she requested from Commander Park. Cultural integration is proceeding smoothly across all participating species, Park replied. The Galactic Council has officially recognized human influence as a beneficial factor in interspecies development. 47 star systems have established educational exchange programs, and 63 species have requested permanent human cultural advisors. Chen nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Humanity had been asked to help win a war, and they had succeeded. But, more importantly, they had helped create a galaxy where different species could learn from each other, share ideas, and work together toward common goals. The Void Stalkers were now peaceful explorers and researchers. The rigid caste systems that had limited individual potential in dozens of species were giving way to more flexible social structures. Democratic ideals were spreading throughout the galaxy, creating governments that were more responsive to the needs and preferences of their populations. Most remarkably, the galaxy had become a more interesting place. Alien species that had maintained the same cultural patterns for millennia were now experimenting with art, music, literature, and recreational activities. The universe was becoming more diverse, more creative, and more fun. Any regrets? Commander Park asked. Chen considered the question as she watched the hybrid research vessel complete its successful test flight. Humanity had changed the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted, and those changes would continue to ripple outward for generations to come. None whatsoever, she replied. We were asked to keep humans out of this war, but it turned out the galaxy needed us to be exactly who we are. Sometimes the best solution to a problem is to ignore the problem entirely and focus on making everything better. As the UES Normandy prepared for its next mission, a cultural exchange program with a species that had recently discovered the concept of comedy, Chen reflected on the strange path that had brought humanity to this moment. They had been feared for their unpredictability, but that unpredictability had ultimately become the galaxy's greatest asset. The war was over. The Cultural Revolution was just beginning. And, somewhere in the depths of space, former enemies worked alongside human engineers to build technologies that would benefit every species in the galaxy, while alien children learned to appreciate jazz fusion and competitive pie-eating contests. It was, Chen decided, exactly the kind of universe worth fighting for.